The scream from room 712 cut through the hallway before Maria even touched the door. Her cat rattled to a stop. Her heart pounded. She had cleaned this hotel for 3 years and never once heard a sound like that at 2 in the morning. She pressed her ear to the door. Silence now. Just her own breathing and the hum of the hallway lights. She knocked softly, then harder. No answer. She had a master key. She was not supposed to use it unless there was an emergency, but something in her chest told her this was one. She turned the lock and stepped inside. The suite was a mess of overturned glasses and spilled wine. A man lay on the floor near the window, his shirt open, his breathing shallow and fast. His face was pale. For a moment Maria thought he was having a heart attack. She rushed to him, turned him onto his side the way she remembered from a first aid class years ago, and checked that his throat was clear. He coughed, gasped, and opened his eyes just long enough to look at her before they rolled shut again. She should have called the front desk. She should have walked away and let security handle it. Instead she knelt beside a stranger who reeked of whiskey and fear, and she stayed. His name, she would learn later, was Daniel Ritchie. But that night, he was just a frightened man mumbling words that made no sense to her. "They are going to find out," he whispered, eyes still closed. "I can't stop it anymore." Maria brushed damp hair from his forehead. She had no idea who he was talking about, or what he could not stop. She simply propped a pillow under his head and stayed close, watching his chest rise and fall, making sure he did not choke on his own breath. For an hour she sat there while the city outside slept. She thought about her mother lying in a hospital bed 3 miles away, about the medical bills stacking on her kitchen counter, about the 2 jobs she worked just to keep the lights on. She thought about how strange it was that this man, surrounded by marble floors and imported furniture, looked more broken than she had ever felt. Around 4 in the morning, he stirred again. His eyes opened, clearer this time, and he stared at her like he was trying to remember how she got there. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough. "Maria," she said. "I cleaned the rooms here. You scared me half to death." He tried to sit up, winced, and pressed a hand to his ribs. "Did I hurt you?" "No," she said. "You just scared yourself, I think." He almost laughed, but it turned into a cough. He looked around the wrecked room, at the broken glass near the door, at his own reflection in the window, and something in his expression changed. Shame, maybe. Or exhaustion. Or both. "You should go," he said quietly. "Forget you saw this." "I already called for water and some bread," Maria said. "You need something in your stomach before you stand up." He blinked at her, confused by her calm. Most people who saw him like this either ran or tried to use it against him. She did neither. She simply reached for the ice bucket, wrapped a few cubes in a towel, and placed it gently against the back of his neck. "You don't know who I am," he said. "I don't need to," she answered. "Right now you're just someone who needs help." He studied her face for a long moment, the exhaustion in his eyes giving way to something like disbelief. In his world, kindness always came with a price. He waited for her to ask for money, to pull out a phone, to do anything that revealed her real motive. She did none of that. She simply sat on the edge of the bed, checked his pulse against her wrist, and waited for the room service she had ordered. When the food arrived, she thanked the young man at the door quietly so he would not see who was inside, then set the tray on the table and helped Daniel take a few bites of bread. "Slow down," she said. "You'll get sick." He obeyed, which surprised him more than her. As the sun began to rise behind the curtains, he finally asked, "Why are you doing this?" Maria shrugged. "Because nobody should wake up alone and scared. Not even someone like you." He did not respond to that. He simply looked at her, as if trying to memorize a face he was certain he would never see treat him this way again. By the time he was steady enough to stand, the first light of morning had turned the sky outside a soft gray. Maria gathered her supplies, careful not to look at anything on the desk or the papers scattered near the couch, because some part of her understood that whatever this man's life involved, it was not her business. "Thank you," he said as she reached the door. She turned back and gave a small, tired smile. Get some sleep, sir. And maybe drink some water before you drink anything else tonight. He almost smiled at that. She left the room, pushed her cart down the hallway, and finished her shift like any other night. She told no one what had happened, not even her closest coworker, Alena, who asked why she looked so pale. Rough night, Maria said. Just tired. She had no idea that the man she helped control the criminal empire that stretched across half the city. She had no idea that his name alone was enough to make grown men lower their eyes. All she knew was that a stranger needed help, and she had given it without asking for anything in return. But somewhere behind her, in a hotel room littered with broken glass, Daniel Ritchie sat alone with a question that would not leave his mind. In a life built on fear, threats, and constant suspicion, why had a stranger's kindness shaken him more than any enemy ever had? He picked up the small note the front desk had left with the food order. Room 712, cleaning staff, Maria. Nothing more. No last name. No number. Just enough information for him to begin searching, though he told himself he would not. He told himself a lot of things that morning. Most of them were not true. 2 floors below, in the hotel security office, a guard reviewed camera footage as part of a routine check and noticed a staff member entering a guest suite without incident. It seemed unremarkable enough to log and forget. Daniel Ritchie showered, changed into a clean shirt, and walked out of the hotel as though nothing unusual had happened. His driver was waiting outside, unaware that anything at all was different about the man climbing into the back seat. But something was different. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Daniel had woken up not thinking about enemies, or deaths, or the weight of decisions that ended other people's lives. He had woken up thinking about a woman with tired eyes and steady hands who treated him like a person instead of a name people whispered in fear. He did not know it yet, but that single night would become the beginning of the only honest chapter of his entire life. And somewhere across the city, Maria walked home in the early morning light, her feet aching, her mind already moving toward the hospital where her mother waited. She had no idea that the stranger she helped would soon walk back into her life, carrying a secret far heavier than anything she could imagine. For now, she simply climbed the stairs to her small apartment, lay down for a short rest before her next shift, and let herself forget the strange, quiet hours she had just spent with a man whose world was about to collide with hers in ways neither of them could have predicted. 3 weeks later, Maria's phone buzzed with a number she did not recognize. She almost ignored it. She was folding laundry in her small kitchen, the radio playing softly, her mother resting in the next room after a long day of treatment. But something made her answer. "Is this Maria?" a calm voice asked. "Who is this?" "You helped a man in room 712 a few weeks ago. He would like to thank you properly." Maria's stomach dropped. She had told no one about that night, and yet here was a stranger confirming she had been there. "I don't understand," she said carefully. "How did you get this number?" "Mr. Ritchie is a man who does not like unanswered debts," the voice said. "He would like to meet you. Nothing more. If you refuse, no one will bother you again." Maria stood frozen in her kitchen, laundry forgotten in her hands. Every instinct told her to say no. She had heard the name Ritchie whispered in the news, always tied to words like investigation and suspicion, though nothing had ever been proven. She knew enough to be afraid. But she also remembered his eyes that night, the fear in them, the way he had thanked her like no one had ever done something kind for him before. "Where?" she finally asked. 2 days later, she found herself sitting in a small, quiet cafe near the edge of the city, one she had walked past 100 times but never entered. It was not the kind of place she expected a powerful man to choose. No guard stood at the door. No black cars lined the street. Just simple tables, warm bread, and quiet conversation. Daniel Ritchie was already seated when she arrived, dressed plainly, no jewelry, no obvious signs of wealth. He stood when he saw her, which surprised her more than anything else that had happened so far. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I almost didn't," she admitted, sitting across from him. "I don't blame you." He poured her a cup of tea without asking, then hesitated, unsure if that had been too forward. "I wanted to see you again. Not to repay you, though I intend to help with your mother's bills whether you agree or not. I wanted to understand why a stranger would help someone like me without asking for anything. Maria studied him. In daylight, without the wreckage of that night surrounding him, he looked different. Tired, yes, but composed. Careful. Like a man who measured every word before speaking it. I didn't help you because of who you are, she said. I helped you because you needed it. That's all. Most people who learn who I am start asking for things, he said quietly. Money. Protection. Sometimes worse things. I don't want any of that. I know, he said. That's what makes this strange. They talked for almost 2 hours that day, though neither of them noticed the time passing. Maria spoke about her mother's illness, the long nights at the hospital, the 2 jobs she worked just to stay afloat. Daniel listened more than he spoke, which was unusual for him. He was used to people performing for his attention, flattering him, hoping for favors. Maria did none of that. She spoke plainly, sometimes bluntly, and it unsettled him in a way he found himself wanting more of. When he finally spoke about himself, it was carefully, in pieces. He mentioned a nephew he was trying to protect from a life he never wanted for himself. He mentioned responsibilities passed down to him that he had never chosen. He did not explain everything, and Maria did not push. She sensed the weight behind his silence and respected it. Why did you agree to meet me? He asked as their tea grew cold. Curiosity, maybe, she admitted. And because that night, you weren't scary. You were just a person who needed someone to make sure you didn't choke on your own fear. He almost smiled at that, the same small, surprised smile from that morning weeks ago. Over the following days, Daniel found reasons to see her again. A message asking how her mother was doing. A car arriving outside the hospital to take her home after a long shift, driven by a quiet man named Oliver who never asked questions and never mentioned who sent him. Small gestures, nothing dramatic, nothing that demanded attention. Maria resisted at first. She told herself this was dangerous, that men like Daniel Ritchie did not simply become friends with janitors out of kindness. But every interaction proved gentler than she expected. He never pressured her. He never asked for anything she was not willing to give. He simply showed up, quietly, consistently, like someone testing whether decency could survive contact with his word. One evening, he arrived at the small diner where she worked her second job, sitting in a corner booth long after the dinner rush had ended. He ordered a simple cup of coffee and waited until her shift ended before speaking. I don't usually explain myself, he said as she wiped down the counter nearby. But I think you deserve to understand a little of what you are dealing with. Maria set down her cloth and sat across from him, arms crossed, listening. My family built something a long time ago, he said. Something I inherited rather than chose. There are expectations. Obligations. People who depend on decisions I make, and people who suffer from decisions I have made in the past. I am not a good man, Maria. I want you to understand that clearly before this goes any further. Then why tell me? She asked. Because you already saw the worst of me on the floor of that hotel room, he said. I would rather you know the truth than discover it the hard way. Maria was quiet for a long moment, turning his words over in her mind. She thought about her own life, the debt she carried, the fear of losing her mother, the exhaustion that never seemed to end. She thought about how easy it would be to walk away from a man whose world was built on danger. But she also thought about the fear in his eyes that first night, the way he had looked at her like she was the only honest thing in a room full of lies. I'm not asking you to be a good man, she finally said. I'm asking you to be honest with me. That's all I need. Something shifted in his expression then, something like relief mixed with disbelief. No one had ever asked so little of him and meant it. Over the following weeks, their meetings became more frequent, though always careful, always quiet. Daniel began covering her mother's medical expenses without making it feel like charity, simply routing payments through channels that left Maria no room to refuse without seeming ungrateful. He never brought it up directly, and she never thanked him for it directly either. It became an unspoken understanding between them. She began to notice small things about him that contradicted everything she thought she knew about men in his position. He remembered details from their conversations, small things like her mother's favorite tea or the name of the hospital nurse who had been kind to them. He listened more than he spoke. He apologized when he was late, something she suspected he rarely did with anyone else. One night, as they sat together on a quiet rooftop overlooking the city, he admitted something that surprised her more than anything before it. "I don't sleep well," he said, staring out at the lights below. "Haven't in years. Too much to think about. Too many decisions that keep me awake." That night in the hotel, Maria said carefully, "What happened?" He was silent for a long moment, and she wondered if she had pushed too far. But then he spoke, quietly, like a confession he had been carrying for weeks. "A decision I made cost someone their freedom," he said. "Someone who didn't deserve what happened to them. I drank because I didn't know how to carry that weight anymore. I'm not proud of it." Maria did not offer easy comfort or forgiveness. She simply placed a hand over his, the same steady hand that had held him upright that first night, and let the silence between them say what words could not. "You don't have to carry everything alone," she said finally. He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing something he had been searching for without knowing its name. In that moment, standing above a city that feared him, Daniel Ritchie realized that the woman beside him was not impressed by his power or frightened by his reputation. She simply saw him, flaws and all, and stayed anyway. Neither of them spoke of what this meant for their futures. Neither of them acknowledged how dangerous it was for a man like him to care for someone with no protection, no name, and no place in his world. But as the city lights flickered below them, something had already changed between them, something neither could take back. And somewhere in the shadows of his organization, a quiet observation had already been made. A man who never showed vulnerability was suddenly visiting a woman who cleaned hotel rooms for a living, and in Daniel Ritchie's world, such observations rarely stayed unnoticed for long. Spring arrived quietly that year, though little in Maria's life felt quiet anymore. Her mother's health had stabilized enough that the doctor spoke of small hope instead of grim warnings. The bills that once crushed her had somehow become manageable, though she still refused to ask Daniel exactly how much he had paid or arranged behind the scenes. Some part of her needed to believe their connection was not built on money, even as she understood how deeply his resources shaped her new sense of relief. Their meetings had become a steady rhythm neither of them spoke about openly. A quiet dinner once a week at a small restaurant far from the center of the city, where no one recognized either of them. Long walks after her late shifts, when the streets were empty except for distant traffic and the hum of streetlights. Conversations that stretched for hours, covering everything from her childhood memories of her mother teaching her to cook, to his own guarded stories about growing up surrounded by men who valued loyalty over kindness. Daniel began to open up more than he ever intended. He told her about his father, a hard man who built the family's influence through fear rather than respect, who taught his son that weakness got people killed. He told her about his mother, who died when he was young, leaving him alone with a father who saw affection as a liability. He told her about the nephew he mentioned before, a boy named Anthony, barely 17, who Daniel was desperate to keep away from the life that had swallowed him whole. "He wants to be like me," Daniel admitted one evening, frustration heavy in his voice. "He thinks this life is about respect and power. He doesn't see what it actually costs." "What does it cost?" Maria asked gently. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "Everything that matters," he finally said. "Sleep. Trust. The ability to feel safe anywhere, even in your own home. I don't want that for him." Maria listened without judgment, offering no easy solutions, simply presence. It was becoming clear to both of them that whatever this was between them, it went far beyond gratitude or curiosity. It had become something neither of them had words for yet, though both felt its weight growing heavier with each meeting. One evening, Daniel arrived at her apartment unannounced, something he had never done before. Maria opened the door to find him standing there, uncharacteristically nervous, holding a small paper bag. "I brought soup," he said. "For your mother. I heard she wasn't feeling well today." Maria stepped aside to let him in, surprised by the simple gesture. Her apartment was small, worn at the edges, nothing like the world he usually inhabited. But he looked around without judgment, taking in the modest furniture, the framed photos on the wall, the quiet warmth of a home built on love rather than money. Her mother, propped up on the couch beneath a thin blanket, studied him carefully as Maria introduced him simply as a friend. "You're the one who's been sending the car," her mother said, her voice weak but sharp with observation. "And paying for things you think we don't notice." Daniel glanced at Maria, caught off guard by the older woman's directness. "I only wanted to help," he said honestly. "Why?" her mother asked. He considered the question carefully before answering. "Because your daughter helped me once, when she had no reason to. I'm trying to return the favor, in whatever small way she'll allow." Her mother studied him a moment longer, then nodded slowly, as if satisfied by his honesty. "Sit down," she said. "You look like you haven't eaten a real meal in weeks." Daniel obeyed, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he sat in a modest kitchen, sharing a simple meal with two women who asked nothing of him except honesty. It was, he realized later, one of the most peaceful evenings he had experienced in years. But peace, he knew, rarely lasted long in his world. A few days later, Daniel received a message from a longtime associate named Victor, a man who had served his family for over a decade and who rarely brought concerns directly unless they mattered. "People are talking," Victor said carefully, seated across from Daniel in his private office. "About the woman. About how often you've been seen with her." Daniel's expression hardened. "And who exactly is talking?" "Enough people that it's become a conversation," Victor said. "You know how this works. Weakness gets noticed. Attachments get used." "She is not a weakness," Daniel said firmly. "She could become one," Victor replied. "If the wrong people decide she matters to you." Daniel said nothing for a long moment, staring out the window at the city below. He knew Victor was right, even as every part of him resisted the idea. In his world, care for another person was rarely seen as strength. It was seen as leverage, a door left open for enemies to walk through. "I won't push her away because people are talking," Daniel finally said. "Then at least be careful," Victor warned. "Because if certain rivals learn how much she means to you, they won't hesitate to use her against you." That warning settled uneasily in Daniel's mind over the following days. He found himself watching the streets more carefully when he visited Maria, noticing cars that lingered too long, faces that seemed unfamiliar in a neighborhood he had come to know well. He said nothing to her about his growing unease, not wanting to frighten her, but he began adjusting small details of his visits, varying his routes, arriving at different times, always cautious without explaining why. Maria, perceptive as ever, eventually noticed his distraction. "You're somewhere else tonight," she said one evening as they sat together on her small balcony, the city stretching quietly below them. Daniel hesitated before answering. "Some people in my world have started noticing us," he admitted. "I don't want you caught in the middle of something dangerous." Maria's expression didn't waver with fear the way he expected. Instead, she simply asked, "What does that mean for you?" "It means I have to be more careful," he said. "For your safety and mine." "And if I don't want you to hide me away like something shameful?" she asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty beneath it. Daniel turned to look at her fully, struck once again by her refusal to be intimidated by the world he came from. "I'm not ashamed of you," he said firmly. "I'm afraid of what my word could do to you." Maria reached for his hand, holding it firmly. "Then let's be careful together," she said. "Instead of you carrying this weight alone." Something in Daniel's chest loosened at her words, a tension he hadn't realized he was holding. For years he had faced every threat, every danger, entirely alone, trusting no one fully, always calculating who might betray him next. Maria offered something different, a partnership built not on fear or obligation, but genuine care. Over the following weeks, their bond deepened despite the growing shadow of danger surrounding them. Daniel introduced her carefully to a small circle of people he trusted completely, including Victor, who remained cautious but respectful once he saw how genuinely Maria cared for Daniel's well-being rather than his resources or position. Even young Anthony, Daniel's nephew, met Maria briefly during a quiet family dinner Daniel arranged, hoping to show the boy a version of relationships built on respect rather than fear. Anthony watched the interaction between his uncle and Maria with quiet curiosity, noticing how differently Daniel behaved around her, softer, more open, less guarded than the man Anthony usually observed. "You like her," Anthony said afterward, more observation than question. "I do," Daniel admitted simply. "She's not scared of you," Anthony noted. "Not the way everyone else is." "No," Daniel said. "She isn't." "Why not?" Daniel considered the question seriously before answering. "Because she sees me as a person first, not as a name people fear." "That's rare, Anthony. Rarer than anything money or power can buy." The boy nodded slowly, something shifting in his understanding of what real strength might actually look like, an understanding entirely different from the one his environment had been teaching him his whole life. But even as their bond grew stronger, the whispers within Daniel's organization grew louder. Rivals who had long searched for weaknesses to exploit began asking careful questions about the janitor who had captured the attention of a man feared throughout the city. It was only a matter of time before those whispers reached ears far more dangerous than Victor's. One evening, as Maria walked home from her late shift at the diner, she noticed a car following slowly behind her, keeping pace at a distance that felt deliberate rather than coincidental. Her heart raced as she quickened her steps, relief flooding through her only when she recognized Oliver's familiar car pulling up beside her, Daniel stepping out immediately, his expression tense with concern. "Get in," he said firmly, scanning the street behind her. Maria climbed into the car without argument, her hands trembling slightly as adrenaline began to fade. "Was that?" she started. "I don't know yet," Daniel said honestly. "But I intend to find out." As the car pulled away into the quiet night, both of them understood that whatever peaceful bubble they had built together was beginning to crack under the weight of a world neither of them could fully control. The secret that had once felt safe and private was slowly becoming a target, and neither of them knew exactly how far their enemies were willing to go to exploit it. The following morning, Daniel called an urgent meeting with Victor and two other trusted members of his inner circle. "Someone followed her last night," Daniel said, his voice tight with restrained anger. "I want to know who, and I want to know why." Victor exchanged a glance with the others before speaking carefully. "There have been questions circulating for weeks now about your relationship with her. Some believe it makes you vulnerable. Others see an opportunity." "An opportunity for what exactly?" Daniel asked, though he already feared the answer. "Leverage," Victor said simply. "If someone wanted to weaken your position, threatening someone you care about would be an obvious strategy." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had spent years building defenses against every conceivable threat to his business, his territory, his life. He had never fully considered how vulnerable genuine care for another person could make him until now. "Find out who was in that car," Daniel ordered. Quietly. "I don't want this escalating before we understand exactly what we're dealing with." Over the following days, Victor's investigation revealed troubling information. A rival family, led by a calculating man named Marco Delacroix, had been watching Daniel's movements for weeks, searching for any weakness that could shift the balance of power between their organizations. Marco's people had noticed Daniel's frequent visits to Maria's neighborhood and recognized an opportunity too valuable to ignore. "They're not planning anything drastic yet," Victor reported. "But they're gathering information. Building a file on her. Learning her schedule, her routines, everything about her life." Daniel felt a cold fury settle over him, more intense than any anger he had experienced defending his own interests. The thought of Maria becoming a target because of her connection to him ignited something protective and fierce within him. "I want protection on her immediately," Daniel said. "Discreet, but constant." "She'll notice," Victor warned. "Then I'll explain it to her," Daniel replied firmly. "She deserves the truth, especially now." That evening, Daniel arrived at Maria's apartment with a heaviness in his expression that immediately concerned her. "What's wrong?" she asked as soon as she opened the door. Daniel stepped inside, waiting until the door closed behind them before speaking. "The car that followed you last night wasn't random," he said. It belonged to people connected to a rival organization. They've been watching us for weeks, looking for a way to use you against me. Maria's face paled, though she remained remarkably composed. What does that mean? She asked steadily. It means I need to arrange protection for you, Daniel said. People watching over you discreetly, making sure nothing happens while I handle this situation properly. And if I don't want to live surrounded by guards? Maria asked, her voice firm despite the fear evident beneath it. I understand that, Daniel said gently. But I need you safe, Maria. I can't lose you because of decisions and conflicts that have nothing to do with you. Maria was quiet for a long moment, processing the reality of the danger now surrounding her simply because of her connection to him. Fear was there, certainly, but so was something else, a stubborn refusal to be intimidated into hiding or running away. I won't live in fear, she finally said. But I also understand you're trying to protect me. We'll find a balance. Over the following days, life became more complicated for both of them. Discreet figures appeared occasionally near Maria's workplace and apartment, careful never to draw attention, always ready to intervene if necessary. Maria adjusted to this new reality with quiet resilience, though the strain of constant vigilance began to show in small ways: tension in her shoulders, hesitation before answering her door, careful glances at unfamiliar faces on the street. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself facing difficult decisions within his own organization. Marco Delacroix's interest in exploiting Maria's vulnerability represented more than a personal threat, it represented a challenge to Daniel's authority and control over his own territory. Ignoring the threat risked signaling weakness to every rival watching for an opportunity to challenge his position. We need to send a message, Victor advised during another tense meeting. Show Marco and anyone else watching that this vulnerability isn't actually a weakness at all. What do you suggest? Daniel asked. Expose what he's doing, Victor said. Publicly, if necessary. Let others in the organization see that targeting innocent civilians connected to leadership crosses lines even in this business. Daniel considered this carefully. Exposing Marco's tactics would require revealing information about his own organization's internal politics, information that could create additional complications and enemies. But protecting Maria, and establishing clear boundaries around what tactics were acceptable even within their dangerous world, mattered more to him than the political risks involved. Do it, Daniel decided. Carefully, but do it. Over the following 2 weeks, Victor and his team worked quietly to expose Marco's surveillance of Maria to other influential figures within their broader criminal network, framing it not as a personal vendetta but as a violation of unwritten rules that even feared organizations generally respected, rules against targeting civilians with no connection to actual conflict or business disputes. The strategy worked more effectively than Daniel anticipated. Other powerful figures, wary of similar tactics being used against their own families or associates, quietly pressured Marco to withdraw his surveillance and abandon whatever plans he had been developing. Faced with unexpected isolation from potential allies, Marco reluctantly backed down, though the tension between his organization and Daniel's remained unresolved beneath the surface. But even as this immediate threat subsided, Daniel realized something important through the entire ordeal. His attempts to keep his relationship with Maria secret had ultimately created more danger, not less. Secrecy had made their bond appear more valuable as leverage, more mysterious and therefore more exploitable to those seeking weakness. Maybe hiding this isn't protecting you, Daniel admitted to Maria one evening, exhaustion evident in his voice. Maybe it's making things worse. What are you saying? Maria asked carefully. I'm saying I'm tired of treating something good in my life like a secret to be ashamed of, Daniel said. I want people to understand that you're not a weakness to exploit. You're someone I care about, and that care doesn't make me vulnerable, it makes me more determined to protect what matters. Maria studied him carefully, sensing the significance of what he was suggesting. That would mean everyone knowing, she said. Your word, my word, all of it. Yes, Daniel confirmed. And I understand if that frightens you. But I'm tired of hiding something I'm not ashamed of. Maria considered this for a long moment, weighing the fear of exposure against the exhaustion of constant secrecy and vigilance. Finally, she nodded slowly. Then let's stop hiding, she said. together. That decision, though it brought a measure of relief to both of them, also set into motion a series of events neither could fully predict. Making their relationship openly known would require careful navigation of Daniel's word, potential consequences within his organization, and the inevitable scrutiny from rivals and allies alike who would now see Maria not as a hidden vulnerability, but as an openly acknowledged part of Daniel Richie's life. The choice they made together that evening would soon be tested in ways neither of them anticipated, forcing both to confront exactly how much they were willing to risk for the life they were building despite everything working against them. Word traveled quickly once Daniel stopped hiding his relationship with Maria. Within his organization, reactions varied widely. Some longtime associates, loyal to Daniel through years of shared history, accepted the news with quiet respect, recognizing something different and perhaps healthier in their leader's demeanor since Maria had entered his life. Others reacted with suspicion, viewing the relationship as a potential liability that could be exploited by outside forces or internal rivals seeking to challenge Daniel's authority. Victor, ever practical, worked diligently to manage the internal politics surrounding the announcement, ensuring that Daniel's authority remained unquestioned even as personal details of his life became more publicly acknowledged. People respect strength, Victor explained to Daniel during a private conversation. But they also respect honesty, especially when it's paired with clear boundaries. As long as you demonstrate that this relationship doesn't compromise your judgment or leadership, most will accept it eventually. Daniel took this advice seriously, ensuring that his business dealings remained sharp and decisive even as his personal life became more openly integrated with Maria's. He made it clear through both words and actions that Maria's presence in his life represented strength rather than weakness, someone who grounded him rather than distracted him from his responsibilities. Maria, meanwhile, faced her own challenges adjusting to a life now openly connected to Daniel's world. Her co-workers at both the hotel and diner began treating her differently once rumors spread about her relationship with a man of Daniel's reputation, some with newfound respect tinged with fear, others with obvious discomfort or suspicion. Elena, her closest friend among the hotel staff, approached her carefully one afternoon during a quiet moment in the break room. "Is it true?" Elena asked, her voice low. "About you and Richie?" Maria nodded, unsure how her friend would react. "It's true," she confirmed. Elena studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "You know what people say about him," she said carefully. "About his family, his business." "I know," Maria said honestly. "But I also know the man I've come to care about, someone who's shown me more genuine kindness and honesty than most people I've known my entire life." Elena considered this, then nodded slowly. "Just be careful," she said. "Whatever this becomes, be careful." Maria appreciated her friend's concern, understanding fully the risks involved in loving someone from a world as dangerous and unpredictable as Daniel's. But she had made her choice with clear eyes, understanding the challenges ahead while refusing to let fear dictate her decisions. Meanwhile, tension with Marco Delacroix's organization, though outwardly subdued, continued simmering beneath the surface. Marco, humiliated by his failed attempt to exploit Daniel's relationship with Maria, began searching for alternative ways to undermine Daniel's authority and reputation within their shared criminal world. Several weeks after Daniel and Maria's relationship became publicly acknowledged, Marco orchestrated a carefully planned business dispute designed to embarrass Daniel in front of other influential figures within their network. The dispute involved territory boundaries that had long been settled between their families, boundaries Marco now claimed had been violated by Daniel's organization. Daniel recognized immediately that the dispute was manufactured, designed specifically to test his authority and create doubt among his allies about his ability to lead effectively while distracted by personal matters. Rather than reacting with anger or aggression, Daniel approached the situation with calculated patience, gathering evidence and testimonies that clearly demonstrated Marco's fabricated claims. During a tense meeting between representatives of both organizations, mediated by neutral parties respected throughout their world, Daniel presented clear evidence disproving Marco's accusations, exposing the manufactured nature of the dispute in front of witnesses whose opinions carried significant weight within their community. This entire situation, Daniel stated calmly during the meeting, exists because Marco Delacroix cannot accept that targeting innocent civilians connected to leadership figures violates rules we all generally respect, even in this business. His failure to exploit my personal life has led him to manufacture conflicts to save face. The evidence Daniel presented left little room for doubt among the observers, and Marco's reputation suffered significant damage as a result of his transparent attempt at manipulation. Rather than weakening Daniel's position, the entire situation ultimately reinforced his authority, demonstrating that his personal relationship with Maria had not compromised his judgment or effectiveness as a leader. Following this public vindication, Daniel made a decision that surprised even Victor, his most trusted advisor. "I want to begin transitioning away from certain aspects of this business," Daniel announced during a private meeting with his closest associates. "Legitimate business ventures, investments that don't require the constant vigilance and danger we've built our lives around." Victor studied him carefully. "This is because of her," he said, "not entirely a question." "Partly," Daniel admitted. "But also because I'm tired of a life built entirely on fear and control. I want something different, not just for myself, but for Anthony, for anyone else in this family who might want an alternative to the life we've always known." Over the following months, Daniel began carefully restructuring aspects of his organization's business dealings, shifting resources toward legitimate investments, community programs, and initiatives designed to provide young people like Anthony genuine alternatives to the criminal world Daniel himself had never truly chosen but simply inherited. Anthony, watching his uncle's transformation with growing admiration, began expressing genuine interest in pursuing education and legitimate business opportunities rather than following the path Daniel had once feared he would choose. "I want to help people the way you're trying to now," Anthony told Daniel one evening, genuine enthusiasm evident in his young voice. "Maybe study business or law, something that actually helps instead of hurts." Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of pride and relief at his nephew's words, recognizing in that moment that his choice to embrace honesty and vulnerability rather than fear and control had created ripples of positive change extending far beyond his relationship with Maria. Maria, witnessing Daniel's transformation over these months, felt her own admiration for him deepen significantly. The man she had first encountered broken and afraid on a hotel room floor had grown into someone actively working to create positive change, not just for himself, but for everyone connected to him. One quiet evening, nearly a year after their first unexpected encounter, Daniel invited Maria to the same rooftop where they had first acknowledged the depth of their connection months earlier. The city lights sparkled below them, the same as always, though everything between them had transformed entirely since that night. "I've been thinking about our first meeting," Daniel said quietly, staring out at the familiar skyline. "How different everything might have turned out if you had simply walked away that night, called security, and forgotten about me entirely." "I couldn't do that," Maria said honestly. "You needed someone, and I happened to be there." "You changed everything," Daniel said, turning to face her fully. "Not just my life, but the direction of my entire family's future. Anthony wants something different now. My organization is shifting toward legitimate ventures. All because you chose kindness over fear that night." Maria reached for his hand, holding it firmly as she had done countless times since their first meeting. "We changed things together," she corrected gently. "I couldn't have done any of this without your willingness to embrace something different, something better." Daniel nodded, understanding the truth in her words. Their transformation had been mutual, built on shared vulnerability, honesty, and genuine care rather than fear or obligation. "I want to build a life with you," Daniel said finally, his voice steady despite the significance of his words. "Away from everything dangerous and uncertain about my old world. Something quiet, honest, built on the same kindness you showed me that very first night." Maria smiled, tears gathering in her eyes as she recognized the sincerity behind his words. "I want that too," she said softly. In the months that followed, Daniel continued transitioning his family's business toward legitimate ventures, gradually stepping back from the dangerous world that had defined his entire existence. Marco Delacroix, having lost significant standing and respect following his failed manipulation attempts, eventually faced consequences from his own organization, his influence diminishing considerably as Daniel's reputation for wisdom and integrity grew throughout their community. Maria's mother, her health continuing to improve, watched with quiet joy as her daughter built a life filled with genuine happiness and security, something she had feared might never be possible given their humble beginnings and constant struggles. Anthony, inspired by his uncle's transformation, began pursuing education seriously, determined to build a legitimate future far removed from the dangerous world his family had once been entirely defined by. And Daniel and Maria, having weathered threats, uncertainty, and the significant challenges of building a relationship across vastly different worlds, found in each other exactly what both had been missing their entire lives: genuine partnership built on honesty, respect, and unwavering support through even the most difficult circumstances. Their story became a quiet legend among those who knew the full truth, a reminder that even in a world built on fear and control, genuine kindness could create transformation more powerful than any threat or manipulation ever could. What began as one unexpected night of compassion between a poor janitor and a drunk, broken man had ultimately reshaped not just two individual lives, but an entire family's future, proving that even the most unlikely encounters could become the foundation for lasting, meaningful change.